Every one of us, it seems to me, is dealing with our various bits and pieces of losses that are caused by the ongoing and exhausting nature of this pandemic. Some of our losses are tiny. Some of them are really big, but as the time lengthens and summer unfolds, all of the losses loom large, it seems to me. One of the many heroic and tender gifts of this time I have found, though, is in the variety of ways that these losses, the large ones and the small ones, have been redeemed and reclaimed and remade. They are small resurrections of sorts. The moments in time that we weren't able to mark in the usual ways are still being recognized with all sorts of creativity and courage and new ways to do the old things. Wonderful new ways. We are relearning old lessons too. Things like that church isn't just confined to windowless big rooms and quiet buildings on Sundays, but it is when we're really doing it right. Church is alive. It's out there in the world. We're learning that graduations and birthdays and weddings and protests and parades and marches are reinvented and can be done with color and creativity and technology. All the losses reconfigured by human resilience and stubborn hope. All the month of June is normally an international celebration of pride, especially this particular weekend. This weekend would normally be filled up with a film series or lectures and parades and parties and special pride worship services on this particular Sunday, celebrations of all the contributions of the colorful members of the rainbow family of persons whose identities include descriptive words like lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and more. Pride Sunday hasn't been canceled. It's just that, like everything else in these days, we are reconfiguring how we do it. There are still, thankfully, lots of places you can go for a parade. And in your worship bulletin that you'll see online or that you received in the mail, there is a link there where you can find some parades, virtual parades that you can attend. Today is the 51st anniversary of the Stonewall Riots, June 28, 1969, when trans women of color, gay men, and lesbians, accustomed to police invasions of their gathering places and their homes, finally just grew tired of the systemic violence against LGBTQ persons, and they fought back. Launching from the Stonewall Inn, a bar in the Greenwich Village of New York, they launched on that night what is now remembered as the beginning of the gay liberation movement. Over time, it has become more and more apparent that liberation is needed on multiple fronts, that there are so many people, even all these long years later, that are subjugated in our culture. People who are still enslaved, women, Latinx people, people with disabilities, people who live in black and brown bodies, subject to violence and inequity. And over time, it has continued to become more and more evident to us that there exists a complex, interconnected nature of lots of social categories. Things like gender and race and class and sexual orientation and gender identity that create overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination and disadvantage. Intersectionalities, they're called. And as the liberation struggles continue from the 1970s all up to the current day, all through that time, and before that too, the poets and the prophets and the protesters have called upon each one of us to challenge the larger systems of power in our culture that continue to produce inequality. Systems that continue to deem some lives inherently less valuable than other lives. The great poet Audre Lorde, in her important social critique that was written in 1979 but could have been written yesterday, is indeed prophetic and challenging when she writes that the larger feminist movement is marginalizing, in her words, poor black third world women. And there are so many other examples of that sort of intersectionality and marginalization that takes place across groups and cultures. She notes the master's tools will never be able to dismantle the master's house. We can't use those old tools of oppression and expect to vanquish oppression with them. And she added, racism and homophobia are real conditions of all our lives in this place and in this time. I urge each one of us here to reach down into that deep place of knowledge inside herself and touch that terror and loathing of any difference that may live there. See whose face that terror and loathing wears. Wow. Learning to follow the great commandment of Christ to love one another as we have been loved is an ongoing work, isn't it? To welcome all, to invite all, to judge not, lest we be judged, to see ourselves and to see each other as God sees us. That spiritual work of growing into the beloved community where all are included. That isn't taking a break during the pandemic. Like so many things, that work must be reconfigured for the current day and done better as we do it differently. When my daughter Juliana was a little girl, one of the delights in our family was when it came her turn to say grace at dinner. She would dutifully thank the deity for the most important aspects of her life. And then, after all the thanks, she would conclude with some version of a summation that was meant to be inclusive of all. And I do mean all. I'm quoting fairly accurately, I think, when I remember that her prayers ended something like this. And God bless all the dogs and cats and all the other animals. And God bless Mommy and Ninny and Daddy and Granny and Papa and Fred and Jamie and Stephanie and Mike, and insert other names here. And then she would say, and God bless all the people I know and all the people I don't know and all the people up in heaven that I know and all the people up in heaven that I don't know. Amen. Now, she is a young adult. And thankfully, I've lived long enough to see that her life is a reflection of what she was praying for back then. I'm so thankful for the leadership of the young people in this hard time. And so I decided that I would make this Pride sermon for today a prayer like hers, the prayer of a person from whom I'm privileged to learn every single day. Dear God, thank you so much for all the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people and all the straight allies that I know and don't know, and for all those who are up in heaven that I know and don't know. Thank you for the Bible stories that have not been used to injure, exclude, embarrass, and kill people. Thank you for the story of the love between David and Jonathan, a love that the scripture says was greater than the love between a man and a woman. Thank you for the stories about the love of Jesus and the beloved disciple and Mary, and how when brutality and death came in, they decided to make a chosen family together. Thank you for all the other beautiful and obvious love stories that have always been in the Bible, but that didn't get as much airtime as all the clobber passages in Leviticus. Thank you that they didn't get cut out, those beautiful love stories like Ruth and Naomi and Song of Solomon and lots of others so beautiful in the love that they show. Thank you for all of those people, dear God, who through the years have served as religious teachers and deacons, members, choir directors, youth leaders, pastors, priests, monks, nuns, rabbis, and imams, gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender and genderqueer and intersex, who throughout history have served so courageously as spiritual leaders, even though so many of them were required themselves to be invisible and to hide who they really were. Their lives helped to form ours. We give thanks that their true selves were always celebrated and never hidden from you, because you created them and your creation is good. Thank you for the lesbian, gay, trans, bi, and intersex people who served faithfully side by side with straight and cisgender persons year after year in the military. Thank you for the school teachers, plumbers, artists, actors, parents, friends, musicians, playwrights, physicians, farmers, nurses, attorneys, dancers, designers, mechanics, athletes, people in every job of every race, in every nation, in every part of the world, in every part of life. Thank you for the day-to-day regular lives that most all of us live, hidden in plain sight, side by side, loving and supporting one another, simply wanting what we all want, to be acknowledged and valued with full human and civil rights, to be loved and accepted and celebrated simply for being our true selves. Our hearts ache, O God, when we remember our dead, those who died too soon from AIDS, from suicide, from murder, and from the hatred, judgment, bullying, and rejection of other people. Our hearts ache when we remember Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the Defense of Marriage Act, Exodus International, and other supposed conversion therapies, the religious communities far and wide who preached shame, kicked out their own members, showed discrimination, and caused death. Nations that allowed government-sanctioned torture and murder of LGBTQ persons, even to the present day, and the so many, many other ways that hatred and exclusion have been mainstreamed into our language and culture here and around the world. As we mourn the martyrs, O God, we also give thanks for the gracious gifts that have been given to human history through their lives. Matthew Shepard, Rita Hester, Brandon Tina, Tyler Clementi, Tyra Hunter, Audre Lorde, Harvey Milk, and so many, many, many others we name in our hearts. We thank you for the liberating voices and the courageous lives of those who stood strong outside the Stonewall Inn in New York in 1969, and for all those who stand firm and courageous today, who said and who say no more, and who join other liberating movements in history and have made it possible for all of us to seek and to find freedom. Thank you for the gentle, angry people who were and are our forebears and whose courageous stand for justice and inclusion have brought us to this current place and reality. Thank you for the modern love stories of couples and families and all the forms of joy and love, for those who have struggled to understand, who love and believe and accept unconditionally their children, those who have loved one another quietly, out loud, or closeted for their whole lives. Thank you, loving Spirit, that no matter what any court has ever legislated, there have always been those who loved one another, who gave themselves to each other in promises, who gathered with their family groups, biological and or chosen, and who courageously said yes to love, marked by solemn and joyous ceremonies on beaches, in houses, on mountaintops, in their own backyards, and in the holy houses of worship, in holy unions and covenantal services. And at long last we rejoice that for those who choose it, we may all also be joined in legal marriage, surrounded by the people who love us most. O God, may it be our heart's intention to continue to live and serve and worship and love out and proud, all of us in the family of God. We are thankful for all those who courageously worked to make it so then and now. May we remember that the struggle for human rights is a struggle always for wholeness. The prophets tell us that it is your will, and it's also our will, that none should perish in sorrow and in pain, that all should live and grow and love who they love. Justin Tanis, transgender theologian, writes to remind us all that those who live on the margins have learned we can find the Holy One there on the margins. A sacred beauty is present on the margins, a kind of spiritual honesty that is not found in places of comfort and power. In seeing God at the margins, we rediscover something else. We learn that wherever we are at the center of the heart of God. And so on this Pride Sunday, we rekindle our courage and determination for the struggle that as yet continues. We celebrate the pride and joy we share, old and young, one family. Pride and joy that shine through the still remaining clouds of sorrow. Pride and joy and determination for justice that shine like a great rainbow of diversity, many gifts, one giver, many races and orientations, one God, one love that unites us all. May it be that all will know we are Spirit's family by our love. And, O God, may it be that your compassionate gaze of grace and welcome will shine through all of us to all those we know and don't know. Our hearts are full of pride and gratitude.